I lie in bed at 4 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up, when it's very dark and the telephone doesn't ring and nobody bothers me, and I lie there with my eyes closed. And I can't feel things sometimes. I just feel as if I'm floating in space, and I let those books come to me. And what it feels like is being on the deck of a ship in an active ocean and a warm wind, and walking around on the deck of this ship, and birds come and land on the railing, and I have to feed them. And sometimes I have 7 or 8 books or birds come at once and land on that railing. I've got to feed them all or they might fly away. But that's how I feel about my ideas, that they're birds that come to me on a ship at night. And they come from their own place that has nothing to do with me. I never feel that they come from me, even though they very obviously do. I feel that they come to me. And all the ones that wind up between covers that are good books are the ones that come to me. And the ones that I try very hard to do are the ones that just never make it off my desk. My mother and father read to me all the time. I think this was such an important thing. The house was always full of books. I loved books, and I think that having books and believing that books were alive made me a writer. The other thing I loved to do was draw, and I drew all the time. I drew and drew and drew. Sometimes at night, 4 hours a night, I would draw at the expense of my homework and not do my homework at times. I drew a lot of dramatic scenes, everything from fairy tales to poetry and other very dramatic stories, and knights in armor and athletes. I loved action. And growing up in the 40s and 50s, women characters in the stories I read very often were not in the thick of action, which I resented terribly because I loved action. I loved to run around. I never wore a skirt unless I was made to. I used to climb trees. I used to have fights with boys, and I was a real tomboy. I drew a lot of animals, loads of animals. My life was surrounded with animals anyway, animals in the woods and animals at home. So I drew an awful lot of animals, but I loved drawing them in action. I liked drawing horses and horse races and anything with drama and feeling and emotion and passion in it. Animals figure very prominently in my books, and there are a lot of reasons why. The most obvious is that I draw them very easily, much more so than people, and sometimes I just can express an idea with an animal that I would have a heck of a time getting into a child's face. The other reason I use animals is because animals can do things on the page of a picture book that children, real live children, can't do. Look at these pages from Hazel's Amazing Mother. This is about a bunch of bullies, which I'm sure everybody knows about. But if you had this with real kids, it would look violent and rough, and if there's one thing that I just can't bear, it's violence. So I think it's a little easier for me to show having a raccoon land on another raccoon from a tree branch rather than having a little girl knock over a little boy and push him into the mud. So that's another reason for using animals. This is Lucy, and this is Snowy, and we love them very much. They're extremely bossy. They boss around the whole family. At least Lucy is bossy. She tells us what to do. She sleeps on the bed. She goes where she wants, and she does what she wants. These terriers have wonderful expressions. They show a lot of emotion. They're very devoted, and they have terrific little bodies that go into all kinds of positions. So I use them as models, as base models for all the raccoons and mice and skunks and badgers that I draw, and all the bunnies too. So you can see Ruby right here in those eyes if you look carefully. Some of my characters come from my own kids, and Max and Ruby are Victoria and Meg when they were little. When Meg was born, I think Victoria decided not to be jealous because that would be too awful. She decided instead to be the boss, and so she was. And by the time Meg was 9 months old, I could listen to them downstairs. Victoria would be teaching her how to talk, and she'd just drag her around like a little sack of flour and say, "Chair, chair, say chair." And Meg would not say anything or say something ridiculous. And Victoria taught her how to dress and how to get her clothes on and how to eat neatly and how to do all that stuff that you had to learn how to do. And Meg didn't listen to a word, not a word, and did everything her own way and always has. But when I heard their conversations come up through the floor of the living room into my studio, I just put aside the book I was working on, and I let those wonderful arguments drift onto my pages, and bunnies started to appear, and they became Max and Ruby. All writers fictionalize and make things up and change things until they're just right. And I didn't want to have two girls in this book because I like my books to appeal to boys and girls, and it was somehow funnier to make the younger one a boy. And so Max is a boy. There really is no secret to this except for years and years of practice, so that you don't even think, so that your hand just responds and knows what it's doing. And there's no way to teach your hand and your fingers, for example, to know how much paint and how much water are in the bristles of a brush after you dip them in. When you do this for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week for 30 years, you get so you can feel the paper through the hairs of the brush. I can feel how much color is on a brush with my hand without ever looking. I can just feel it. How do animals walk around in the woods in the dead of night and not bump into things and run into the trees? Well, they have night vision. And artists have a certain amount of night vision too, I think, because they can feel very, very indistinct things right through the hairs of a tiny number 0 brush. There's no magic to it, and yet it's completely magic.